This is video 14 in the series, What's So Hard About Translation? In previous videos of this series, we have seen ways that culture can influence the meaning that we attribute to the messages we encounter. In the next 3 videos, we'll take a closer look at what culture is and how our own culture influences our choices and perceptions. To start with, we need to talk a bit about how we're using the term culture. What we're not referring to are things like the music of Mozart or paintings by Van Gogh or ballets like Swan Lake. One use of the word culture is to refer to things like these or to a knowledge and appreciation of them, but that's not what's in focus here. What we are referring to are the assumptions, values, and patterns of thought and action that people internalize through living in social groups. When we talk about culture, we sometimes seem to attribute to it an existence of its own, almost independent of the people who share it. Often we talk about culture as though it were a place one could visit, as in, people from his culture don't eat meat, or, in my culture, we respect the elderly. The reality is more complex. Culture exists primarily in our heads, and we take it with us wherever we go. Cultures actually do affect places and things when people who share assumptions and values live together for a while and shape their environment to reflect what they share. But places and things shape cultures as well. The important thing to remember is that culture primarily consists of ideas and attitudes that we share with the people who share our culture. For most people, the impact of culture on communication is harder to recognize than the impact of language, relationship, or situation. The situations in which communication usually takes place are relatively easy to observe, and it is immediately apparent when we move from one situation to another. We constantly adjust what we say or write to reflect this. We also tend to be sensitive to our relationship with the people we are communicating with. We frame what we say in keeping with what we perceive our relationships to be and what we want them to become, and in general receive immediate feedback regarding our success. Since we are aware of the different kinds of relationships we have with different people, it is relatively easy to project our understanding of those differences on the communication we observe occurring between others. And even if we only speak one language, it is immediately apparent when a language we do not know is being spoken. Culture, on the other hand, is a context we may never be consciously aware of. We cannot see or feel the assumptions, values, and expectations that other people have internalized, and may have no clue if and how they are different from our own. Even when we begin to notice that differences exist, we may never come to the point of understanding how those differences fit within a mental and emotional framework that is different from the one we grew up with. What these values and assumptions consist of, and the nature of the patterns that the things we see and hear fit into, usually goes undescribed and even unnoticed until we begin to experience miscommunication while spending time with people who operate with a different set of assumptions or values. Saying that culture is something we carry around with us in our heads makes culture seem very personalized and individual, which is exactly what it is. But it only got that way through our interaction with people who carry very similar ideas in their heads. Like language, culture is, for the most part, unconsciously absorbed in the course of daily life as people grow up in the midst of people who share a culture. The concept of culture is notoriously difficult to define, and the definitions we're suggesting here won't make everyone happy. Anthropologists and others who study cultures and apply cultural insights have proposed hundreds of definitions over the years, but so far no one has come up with a formulation that everyone can enthusiastically embrace. There are several factors that make defining culture so challenging. One is the difficulty of saying where one culture ends and another begins. Even the most isolated groups usually have some contact with outsiders, and eventual seepage of artifacts, knowledge, and values between them is inevitable. Another is that cultures are in a state of continual flux. They are always changing. A third is that cultures are not homogeneous. There are usually differences that correspond to age, gender, and other subgroupings. A corollary of this is that it is very difficult to find any individual who perfectly typifies a culture of which she is a part. In other words, everyone is an exception to the rule. A fourth factor is that culture's influence is both pervasive and largely invisible. Though it influences everything we think, feel, and do, we can live our whole lives without being consciously aware of its effect on us and others. In spite of these factors, the concept of culture has proven to be an indispensable tool for exploring and explaining much human behavior, including communication. So we, too, will make use of it. For our purposes, then, we'll say that culture refers to the assumptions, values, and patterns of thought and action that people internalize through living in social groups. It's what everybody knows and feels about what things mean and how things get done. The way that culture shapes a society is analogous to the way that our skeletons shape us. Though we will never directly see or touch our skeletons, they are largely responsible for our height and shape, and though the size of each bone is important, the way that each bone connects to the rest of the skeleton is even more important in determining our overall structure. A group's culture might also be compared to a person's muscles and nerves. These two make up networks that are invisible from the outside, but whose presence determines the way we detect and respond to external stimuli. In a similar way, while we can't see or touch the patterns of assumptions and values that tie societies together, we can come to understand them by carefully observing the structures that a society creates, the things and actions that it imbues with significance, and the relationships and activities that its members pursue. Culture can also be compared to the rules of a game or a sport. The rules, of course, have to go along with the equipment, but the equipment does not determine what the rules are. Think of all the games you can play with a standard deck of cards. Have you ever been playing a game only to discover partway through that the people you're playing with don't agree on what the rules actually are? Cross-cultural communication and miscommunication is similar to that, but on a much larger and more complex scale. The challenge of overcoming communication difficulties caused by cultural mismatches is often made more difficult by the fact that, in many instances, people are not even aware that they themselves are actually following cultural rules, let alone that others may have different ones. Even when cultural differences are understood intellectually, people's strong attachment to their own deeply internalized cultural rulebook can make it difficult to empathize with people from other cultures whose hearts may be responding to a different set of values or different ways of expressing them. This is particularly true when what is shocking in one culture is normal in another. So what is your culture like? What are the underlying values and patterns that inform the perceptions, choices, and reactions of the people living in your group? How do these relate to the things you do and see? To approach this topic, it can be useful to consider some of our actions and preferences in light of possible alternatives, and then see if we can identify any underlying principles that explain the choices we make. To get started, consider the following questions. Once you've answered them, we'll explore how some typical answers relate to values and patterns common in North America. Ready? Here we go. Do you prefer to live in a house surrounded by grass or one that is clear of all vegetation? What's the best way to greet someone? Shake hands? Bow? Touch foreheads? Hug? Salute? Kiss? Or maybe another way? Is it better to stand in line when you wait or all crowd around together? Is it better to be slim, a little stocky, or fatter still? Do you love with all your heart or with all your liver? Or maybe with all your intestines? When someone is sick, should they be left alone to rest quietly? Or is it better if someone stays in the room with them? Or should they go outside and sit in the sun? Who would you lend your comb to? Who would you let drink from your water bottle? Who would you let use your toothbrush? What does it mean when a guy and a girl hold hands? What about two guys? What does this sign mean? How about this one? Is it better to wear shoes or go barefoot? How about in someone's living room, in a restaurant, in a cornfield? How close should new acquaintances stand when they talk? Is this too far? Too close? How about this? Or this? Or this? Is it okay for a woman to show her eyes in public? How about her face? Her arms? Her knees? Her breasts? Who is the best person to turn to for advice? A rich person? A famous person? A religious leader? An educated person? An old person? Or someone just like you? Who should decide who people marry? The couple? The parents? Someone else? Should a bride wear white or dress more like this or this? Who should attend a wedding? Does the bride need to be there? How many wives should a man have? Or how many husbands should a woman have? How many kids should a couple have? Who should name the kids? Where should people live when they marry? Should they move away from their parents? Or move in with them? Or at least live near their clan? When you visit people, is it okay to just show up and knock? Or should you call first? Or just walk right in? When people visit, should you talk with them on the porch? Or invite them into the living room? Or the kitchen? Should visitors ever go into your bedroom? What should you offer a visitor? A glass of water? Juice? Coffee? Something stronger? Maybe a cola nut? If a person comes when you're eating, should you ask them to join you? Ask them to wait for you until the meal is finished? Ask them to come back later? Simply ignore them? How should you respond when children disobey? Should you just ignore them? Or give them a timeout? Spank them? Take away privileges? Make them write lines? Give them extra chores? Is it okay for a neighbor to discipline your child? What about a stranger? Is it worse for a child to fight with his sister, break your laptop, or disrespect you in public? Is it worse to steal or not to share? Is it worse to steal or to murder? Should criminals be incarcerated, executed, humiliated? Should they make restitution? Should a sacrifice be made to atone for the crime? Who should run the nation? Should the strongest take over and lay down the law? Should religious figures guide the populace? Is it best to choose leaders by popular vote? Might it be easier and more peaceful for royalty to simply inherit the power? Should those who are the most generous have the strongest voice in decision-making? Should worship be individual or corporate, a formal ritual or a spontaneous expression? What's the best meat to eat at a picnic? Do you prefer beef or cat? Or fried spiders? Or should people eat meat at all? Is it best for the family to eat together at a table inside with knives and forks? Or maybe chopsticks? Or is it best to sit on the floor and eat with your fingers? Or to lie on couches while people serve you? Or maybe meals in your life are more like this. Who should be served first, children or adults? Men or women? Should you talk during a meal or be silent? Should meals be eaten inside or outside the house? And maybe men should eat with other men and women with other women, and kids with kids. If someone invites you to join them for a meal or an outing, should you accept right away? Refuse the first invitation but accept the second? When should you give presents, and whom should you give them to? When is it okay to give people money? Is it okay to use your left hand to do so? Is it okay to give money at Christmas? How about clothes or pets? For Christmas, is it better to give a shirt or underwear? Is fancy soap an appropriate gift? How about shampoo? Is jewelry appropriate? How about a diamond ring? Is it okay to wear a hat in the house? During dinner? During church? In the boss's office? While you pray? To whom should you give flowers? To your mom? How about your dad? What occasions call for cake? Birthdays? Valentine's Day? Weddings? Funerals? When is it okay to ask for help? When you're moving? Doing dishes? To pay for school? To buy a house? Who is it okay to ask? A relative? A friend? Your boss? An employee? When someone dies, who should take control of their children and possessions? Should it be their spouse? Their siblings? Their cousins? Should a dead person be buried or burned? How soon should this happen? Should any of him be eaten? So that's the quiz. In the next video, number 15, we'll begin to explore the principles and patterns that shape our answers.